You're at the gym for your dreaded cardio day on the treadmill. You see someone next to you cranking out 545 miles like nothing, and you're in absolute awe. With a slight boost of motivation, and because you're seething with a masculine competitive drive, you try to one-up the stranger by setting the treadmill speed at 10.6 miles per hour. Things feel nice and easy at the start, but seconds later your legs are flooded with lactic acid, your lungs start to burn, your running form collapses, and you're in pure agony. So you put the speed back down to 6.0 miles per hour, just like the pathetic Jeffrey runner you are. Okay, now obviously I'm never gonna look down on someone for whatever pace they run, To each their own, because hey, guess what? I used to suck as a runner too. I remember back in 8th grade when we had to do the mile for some random fitness test, and believe it or not, I did terrible. I don't even think I cracked 12 minutes. With that sort of understanding, what is it about me now that makes me different from the average person physiologically and anatomically, and why is it that you can't sustain the same kind of pace that I'm trying to hold on a treadmill? Perhaps right now you may suck at running, and that's okay. Everyone does at some point. But before you understand how you can get to the level that which I'm at, and which plenty of other really competitive runners are at, you need to understand your physiology, you need to understand your anatomy. What is it about my body that makes me different from you? That's what we're going to explore today, here on Cruise Control Running. Now, as someone who's obviously the sexiest runner on the YouTube platform, along with just so happening to have a biology degree, I think I have a good foundation into being able to discuss this kind of topic. So I am going to sprinkle a little bit of scientific knowledge into this kind of thing, and if you don't have any sort of biology background, that's okay. I'll try to simplify it the best I can for you so that it's digestible for the average viewer. As you guys know, the most simplest form of matter is atoms. Atoms make molecules, molecules make macromolecules, which are things such as fats, carbohydrates, proteins. Those things make cells, right? Whether we have muscle cells or skin cells, and they combine to make tissues. Those tissues serve a specific function, combined to make organs, right? Organs such as the heart, the lungs, the liver, and of course with cooperating organs you have an organ system, right? Such as the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system, which are the two primary organ systems that we're going to be talking about. So when you're in a relaxed state, your lungs take in oxygen, and that oxygen eventually ends up into your bloodstream. That bloodstream will flow into your heart, and then from your heart, those arteries will pump those oxygenated blood cells into the different parts of the body, such as the different muscles and tissues that are needed in order for your body to properly function. After that, the veins will take that deoxygenated blood back up to the heart, and then that heart will pump all the blood back into the lungs again, repeating the cycle over and over again. When you're doing something more intense, your body's going to require more oxygen. In order for it to do that, your body will increase the heart rate in order to get more oxygen into the muscles. However, somebody who is an untrained athlete will have a more difficult time getting oxygen to the muscles because their heart perhaps may not be as strong as someone who's conditioned. And this brings us to the first reason, which is purely heart strength. You see, whether you're a conditioned athlete or you're somebody who's not very well trained, your heart rate is going to go up, and it's going to reach a maximal heart rate at some point depending on how hard you go. So why is it that one person may be able to get more oxygen into their muscles than another person? That difference comes with the strength of the heart, that being in a quantitative value called the stroke volume. And the stroke volume simply is the amount of blood that the heart can pump per pump. When you multiply this by your total beats per minute or your heart rate, that will give you a value of a cardiac output. So for example, let's take the average male individual, as in his heart strokes 70 milliliters of blood for every beat. Multiply that by 200 beats per minute, assuming that his maximal heart rate is 200 beats per minute. That'll come out to a total of 14 liters of blood, and that 14 liters is your cardiac output. Endurance athletes can have a stroke volume of up to 200 milliliters. So if you multiply that 200 milliliters by 200 beats per minute, that'll come out to a total of 40 liters. So you can see just that huge discrepancy, the difference between 14 liters of blood versus pumping 40 liters of blood. That's pumping nearly 3 times more oxygenated blood to your muscles, which is why conditioned endurance athletes tend to have a lower resting heart rate. For me, for example, I have about a 45 beats per minute heart rate when at complete rest. And this is simply because my stroke volume is just higher. The second reason is increased lung capacity. This is extremely helpful for an athlete because increased lung capacity means your lungs are able to take in more oxygen. And if you're able to take in more oxygen, that's more oxygen that can get to the muscles. This happens through the strengthening of the diaphragm and the lung muscles in order to increase that total capacity. This is why something like high altitude training is very useful for endurance athletes. For those who don't know what that is, it's when athletes go to an area such as Kenya or Colorado where the place is way above sea level, several thousand meters above sea level. For example, Kenyan runners, they'll run about 8,000 feet above sea level. With higher altitude comes less oxygen in the air, and as a result, your body will physiologically adapt to take in more oxygen by trying to increase the lung capacity by strengthening the lung muscles and diaphragm. So now we've talked about the heart within the cardiovascular system, and we've talked about the lungs within the respiratory system, which are arguably the two most important organs involved in cardio. Now we're going to dive into a more microscopic level. Number 3 is increased capillary density. For those who don't know, capillaries are the smallest blood vessels that connect to your muscles that allow the distribution of blood, nutrients, water to all the different parts of the muscle. It is also very useful to getting rid of carbon dioxide and lactic acid out of the muscles as well efficiently. A higher capillary density allows for more oxygen transport, which in return allows for better function of the muscles. And so if you have more pathways to get to the muscles, that just gives the muscles more opportunity to obtain that oxygen and thus become more functional. Everything else that gets expelled from the muscles, such as the carbon dioxide and the lactic acid, can now be taken out of the body and distributed somewhere else. Particularly the carbon dioxide, because once you have that deoxygenated blood, now that's going to travel back up to the heart and then pump right into the lungs so that it can be oxygenated yet again. Getting oxygen into the body is just as important of getting rid of the carbon dioxide and lactic acid out of the body. That burning sensation that you get in your legs is the lactic acid. Reason number 4, and I personally consider this the least important reason, but it's increase in glycogen storage capacity. So if you guys don't know what glycogen is the storage form of glucose. Glucose is something you eat, it's a sugar, right? And that sugar, if not being used, has to be stored somewhere. That's usually going to be stored in the form of glycogen. Glycogen are these massive chains. They contain thousands of glucose all interconnected with one another. Now the reason why I say this is the least important is because glycogen is something you don't really have to worry about being depleted unless you're running for about 2 or more hours. So usually marathon runners, what they'll do is every week their long run will get increasingly longer so that their body can physiologically adapt to glycogen depletion. What it'll do for the future is store more glycogen in the muscle so that whenever you run longer, you're able to have that little extra bit of storage of glycogen. And as a result, you can run longer without hitting the dreaded wall. And the final reason for why you suck at running, and probably the most important reason, is something called mitochondrial density and volume. As you guys know, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. The purpose of the mitochondria is to create ATP, and that ATP goes to our muscles. And that ATP is what actually allows for the muscle movement. Without ATP, your muscles kind of just freeze up. So as we talked about before, glucose is one of the forms of energy that we eat. I'm not going to go into the whole process of this because it will be really complicated, but essentially you have glucose when in the presence of oxygen allows for the synthesis of ATP molecules. So as you can imagine, if your muscles have more ATP to use, it makes your muscles more efficient. Your body can have all of this oxygen, but if it doesn't have somewhere for the oxygen to go, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. Mitochondrial density refers to the physical size of each mitochondria. Think of it like a factory. The bigger a factory is, the more products it can produce. The bigger the mitochondria, the more ATP it can be able to produce. The more places for oxygen to go, the more efficient the cells can be to producing ATP, thus more ATP gets produced. Not only is the increase of the mitochondrial density important, but the volume of the mitochondria is important as well. The volume refers to the number of actual mitochondria present. So if you increase the number of mitochondria along with increasing the density, again, more places for oxygen to go, and thus more production of ATP, you create someone who's more efficient. There's a quantitative value for the ability to take in a lot of oxygen, and that's called your VO2 max. This is perhaps the most important value in physiological laboratory tests. VO2 max literally refers to the volume of how much oxygen can be taken into your muscles. The higher your VO2 max typically is the best indicator of how fit of an athlete you are. Someone like me, for example, who actually got lab tested, has a VO2 max of 70.6. That will put me at the top 0.2% of the male population. Most elite athletes though have somewhere between 80 or above, 80, 85. I've seen some athletes who have above 90. It's crazy how good you can get. Along with all those physiological factors, there are some genetic/anatomical factors that may play a role as well. For example, if you're born with short legs, then chances are you probably won't be as efficient of a runner. If you're someone who's 300 pounds, obviously you're not going to be as efficient of a runner because your body's going to require a lot more energy to take up and hold up all that excess weight, regardless if it's fat or muscle. Someone who's 250 pounds of muscle, your heart can't really tell the difference between someone who's 250 pounds of muscle and 250 pounds of fat. And there are your reasons why you probably suck as a runner. And that's okay. Again, if you suck as a runner, in the future, I'll make a video to explain how you cannot suck as a runner. A lot of it comes down to training at a good volume, consistency, good nutrition, good sleep, all the typical things that come with having good health, well-being, and fitness. If you guys have any questions, any clarifications, I'll be sure to answer any questions you have in the comments. And I'll leave links to the resources that I used as research for this video. That's everything from Cruise Control Running, and always remember this: it's never been easier to be above average. Take care.